Hello and welcome everyone to another episode of Exposición. I'm Hugo Vargas alongside my colleague
Alejandro Galvan.
And as always, we are exposing the lies and shining a beacon of light on the truth. And today we are going to shine the spotlight on high school graduation rates. And we are going to focus specifically on graduation rates of Hispanics and African Americans in comparison to those of whites. Now, before I show you guys these statistics, I want to explain how they're taken. So what they're considering is students who start as freshmen and graduate as seniors on time. And that's how these numbers are compiled. Now, the statistics that I'm going to talk about are brought to us by the National Center for Education Statistics, or the NCES for short. And first, I'm going to bring up the graduation rates, and this is across the nation, and this is for the year of 2009-2010. And in that year, high school graduation rates were at 78%, and that's across the nation, all races. For whites, it was at 83%. Hispanics, you had them at 71%, and African Americans at 66%. And as you can tell right there, there's quite a big gap between whites and Hispanics and African Americans. You had 12 points between whites and Hispanics and 17 points between whites and African Americans. Now, the most recent ones that we have, which is the school year of 2016 to 2017, the total graduation rate was at 85%. So it went up, and it went up in all phases. Whites were at 89%, Hispanics were at 80%, and African Americans were at 78%. So even though the gap narrowed, it's still quite a considerable gap. I mean, you're looking at 9 and 12 points, respectively, for Hispanics and African Americans. Now, these numbers, they speak, right? They speak for themselves. What do you think is the reason for this gap? Is it that whites are just more intelligent than Hispanics or African Americans, or do you think there's other factors in there?
I think financial status has something to do with it. You know, a lot, more Africans and more Hispanics go home, they have more responsibilities, I believe. Me coming from a Hispanic home, the eldest didn't really have the time to do his or her homework because they were too busy taking care of the rest of the family, while both parents were at work. And I don't know how it is in a white's home, but we watch, a lot of television, and that's what we assume that's what a home is supposed to look like. So we see the husband always at work and the wife is at home, and the kids come back, from school to a home-cooked meal. There's really no responsibilities, I believe.
Yeah, and I agree with you, and I'm glad that you brought that up, because there's some figures that we're going to talk about, which would point to your point. And again, it's going to be with income, and also low income and poverty families. They have different challenges that they face as opposed to people who have a little bit more money. And we're going to talk about how this affects the African American and the Hispanic community more than those that are white. So now, one of the reports that I was looking at is the Building a Grad Nation report. So it's a great report. It's created by the Civic Enterprises and Everyone Graduates Center at Johns Hopkins University, and it's released annually in partnership with the Alliance for Excellent Education and the America's Promise Alliance. Now, the Grad Nation campaign goal is of a national on-time graduation rate of 90%, and that's across the nation, which is a lofty goal, but yet they were at 85% a couple of years ago, so they're pretty close to reaching that. Now, it's very important that our students are graduating, and this is some of the reasons that they came up with, right? And I think some of them are pretty obvious, but some of them I think that we don't really think about. But I'm going to go ahead and read to you what they were saying. So what they found is that young people who don't graduate high school are less likely to be employed, earn less income, have worse health care and lower life expectancy, are less likely to be civically engaged and more likely to be involved with the criminal justice system and require social services. So again, it's important that we have our children graduating, because if not, we're destining them to this type of life. Yeah, they're facing a statistically speaking, yeah, definitely. And now to your point, Hispanic and African Americans and low income students are less likely to graduate than whites. African Americans and Hispanics are more likely to live in poverty than whites. 36% African Americans, 30% for Hispanics, and 12%, only 12% for whites. And so what this is saying is, just you being a Hispanic and you being an African American, that's already putting you behind the eight ball here. And on top of that, if you're low income as well, that's even making it worse for you. So again, some of the factors that we face as minorities. Now, in 2016, 47.6% of students were low income, but they amounted to more than 2/3 of the nation's non-graduates, with an overall graduation rate of 77.6%. So here you go. Less than half of the students are low income, but yet more than 2/3 of them are the ones that are not graduating. So you start to see how income, I guess family income or household income, is impacting graduation rates. And we'll get more into that. Now, the Lumina Foundation released a Stronger Nation report in 2018, which showed that Americans ages 24 to 64 that hold a credential beyond high school is at 46.9%. So what this is saying is that almost half of the people between the ages of 24 to 64 in 2018 hold some type of credential beyond high school. Now, for this same age range, the gap between African Americans and whites with at least an associate's degree was 16.4%. The gap between Hispanics and whites was at 24.5%. And this was a little surprising to me, not so much that African Americans had a smaller gap than Hispanics, but the fact that there was such a big difference between those gaps. From high school, yeah, and because if you look at high school graduation rates, Hispanics got a little bit higher. It's not by much; it's two points, but still, I would have expected that to translate and for those gaps to be a little bit closer than what they are. And now, adding to that, the gaps for high school completers who immediately enroll in college. Now, the gap between African Americans and whites ages 16 to 24 is 6.9%, and it's only 2.4% between Hispanics and whites. So again, you have more Hispanics who are immediately enrolling in college than you do African Americans, yet you have, when you come to college, there's more African Americans that are getting at least an associate's degree that there are Hispanics. Why would you think that is?
I'm going to go based off of my living conditions and where I grew up. This may not fit everybody, every single Hispanic, but I think it might have to do with, the stress of college. College may add more responsibilities, because in a Mexican household, it's not just the parents that are raising the kids are raising the kids as well. They're helping out with everything. We're learning how to cook and babysit and change diapers while trying to study and go to college. And I think that plays, and it has an adverse effect on it. I don't really know too much about, African Americans or, whites, how they live, but I'm just assuming because of, history. That's all I'm going based off of.
Right. So you're thinking it has something to do kind of with the culture, with the Hispanic culture?
Yeah, with the Hispanic culture. I think that there's just too much going on inside a Hispanic home for them to stay focused and on their path to their career. It's not that they don't want it. There's a lot of stuff that comes into play, the things that us Hispanics deal with at home. I think it does have an adverse effect on school. That I think that's why a lot drop out. also. So
High dropout rates. Yeah, and I agree with you, and I think those are some valid points.